What if I told you that freedom often arrives at the edge of despair? Israel walked free, chains broken, backs unbent. For 4 centuries, their cries had risen into the heavens, carried on the wind of sorrow, buried under the weight of Pharaoh's lash. And now, led by Moses, they bore something greater than bread, greater than gold. They bore the covenant of the Almighty. They walked not as slaves, but as sons and daughters of promise. Yet freedom, my friend, freedom is never uncontested. Behind them rose the fury of Egypt. The empire of whips and wheels unleashed its pride. 600 chosen chariots, commanders hardened in war, legions of horsemen wheeling like a storm. And Pharaoh himself, heart of stone, unyielding, a man who would rather bleed the desert dry than admit defeat. The sound of their advance was terror itself, the grinding of iron, the thunder of hooves, the roar of vengeance, and before them, the sea, cold, merciless, infinite. No bridge, no boat, no passage. The horizon itself was a wall. Their path had ended, their strength spent. Behind death, before impossibility. Have you ever stood in such a place? When the future vanishes like smoke, when every door closes, when fear itself becomes a prison. That is where they stood. And terror has a voice. It whispers, "There is no way out." They murmured against Moses. Their words cut sharper than spears. "Why did you lead us here? Was it for this? To die in the wilderness? Better to serve Pharaoh than to perish at the sea." But Moses lifted his eyes higher. Where the people saw water, he sought the one who had split the heavens. Where the people saw death, he remembered the God who had promised life. And though his own heart trembled, though the shadow of doubt pressed hard against his soul, still he chose to look upward. When all others looked back, whoa. Faith often begins where sight ends. The crowd saw only ruin. They measured reality with human eyes. Water too vast, iron too strong, death too certain. But Moses lifted his gaze beyond the horizon of flesh. He remembered the voice that burned in the bush without consuming it, the hand that turned Nile into blood, the power that broke Pharaoh's will with tenfold judgments. That God was not distant, that God was faithful still. He spoke words that clashed against despair. "Do not be afraid, stand firm. You will see the deliverance the Lord brings today. The Egyptians you see, you will see them no more." His tone rang like steel, but beneath it his heart quaked. For what if nothing happened? What if silence was the only reply? What if the promise, so bright, failed beneath the weight of the sea? Faith is not the absence of doubt. Faith is defiance against it. To believe when belief seems madness, to trust when trust tastes like folly, that is faith. The Lord descended. His presence became the shield. Darkness swallowed Egypt. Blazing brilliance bathed Israel. Not retreat, not surrender, but advance. Unthinkable command, step into the impossible, march toward the sea. The night roared with a wind not of this earth. Waters convulsed, then fled. Depths that had never known light now rose like walls, towering on either side. Each drop, each surge, each mountain of water frozen in obedience to the voice of the Almighty. And between them, ground dry as desert stone. A road carved where no road had ever been. Awe swept through the multitude. They had begged for escape. Now they beheld a miracle. Yet miracles demand steps. To walk between those walls was to walk the edge of life and death, to trust that the waters would not collapse, that the hand holding them would not waver. Every soul faced a choice, remain in paralysis or move in faith. And so they began, one step, then another. Hesitation turned to momentum, fear turned to desperate resolve. They entered the passage carved by God himself. Behind them, the thunder of hooves echoed faintly through the darkness. Before them, The unknown stretched wide and terrible. Can you imagine the sound? The roar of waters towering above, held back by unseen strength. The whimper of infants muffled against weary mothers. The creak of carts dragged across the seabed. The crash of spears in the distance, reminding them Egypt had not relented. Every heartbeat was war. Every step was defiance. They marched, and the sea watched. They marched, and Egypt pursued. Each step was more than survival. Each step was testimony. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was no story of the past. He was present, alive, active. What flesh declared impossible, he called inevitable. The sea itself became his servant, bending, holding, waiting. And Moses, though praised as leader, bore the heaviest burden of belief. His staff was lifted, his command given, but his soul wrestled still. Would this path endure until the last crossed? Would the waters remain at bay? Leadership is often the loneliest road, to speak with certainty while trembling within, to carry faith not only for yourself, but for an entire nation. Yet he walked, step for step, carrying both promise and doubt together. Thus, faith became movement, and movement became deliverance. Not in an instant, not in ease, but in the grinding labor of one step, then another, and another. Behind the fury of Pharaoh, before the road carved by God. Around them, oceans restrained by holy will. Over them, the shield of cloud and fire. They marched, and the sea obeyed. Egypt followed, blind with fury. Pride drove them forward as though arrogance itself held the reins. Chariots groaned under the weight of their master's rage, bronze wheels cutting scars into the seabed. Horses shrieked against the storming wind, foam spattering from their mouths. Pharaoh's army thundered into the very path God had opened for his people, never imagining it could turn against them. Then the hand of heaven struck. Confusion ignited among them. Wheels wrenched from axles, iron screamed, proud chariots lurched sideways and snapped. Horses reared in terror, blinded by the unnatural light, thrashing against their own riders. What had been a march of triumph dissolved into chaos. The proud cried out, not with shouts of conquest, but with the howl of fear. For the God of Israel was no silent spectator. He himself fought for his people. Upon the far shore, Moses stood, staff lifted high, face alight with holy fire. The nation held its breath, eyes locked upon their shepherd, their deliverer, the man who stood between them and ruin. His hand trembled not with weakness but with awe. For at dawn, in the hour when the desert turns gold, Moses stretched out his hand, and the sea roared back into place. Walls collapsed with cataclysmic fury. Chariots vanished like pebbles swept away. Riders, iron banners, all devoured in a single breath. The greatest army on earth was silenced in a heartbeat, drowned beneath the judgment of God. Foam surged, then stilled. Waves rolled on as if nothing had ever dared to defy the Almighty. The sea closed its mouth. The empire of chains was no more. Egypt's pride lay buried in the abyss. Israel stood alone, weak in themselves, yet mighty in their God. And Israel sang. Oh, how they sang! A hymn not of rehearsed melody, but of raw deliverance. Tears streamed down weathered faces, voices cracked yet soared. Miriam, sister of Moses, seized a tambourine, her steps striking rhythm upon the earth. Women danced, children clapped, the aged lifted their hands skyward. Their song thundered through the desert air. The Lord has triumphed gloriously. Horse and rider, he has thrown into the sea. What chains could not silence, freedom unleashed. Their song was not merely music, it was testimony, prophecy, remembrance. A nation once voiceless, now declared with power, The Lord is warrior. The Lord is salvation. And that song has never ceased echoing. Among them stood those who had cursed the journey, who had begged to return to slavery. One young man, who once shouted in anger at Moses, now fell to his knees. The sea still thundered in his ears, yet within his chest a new silence formed, the silence of surrender. Yesterday his heart was chained by fear. Today his faith was reborn. Tomorrow he would rise, a father who would teach his children not about Egypt's cruelty, but about God's victory. For deliverance is never only escape, it is transformation. And you, yes, you standing in your own age, do you not face seas that appear uncrossable? Do you not hear the pounding hooves of fear, doubt, and despair behind you? Bills unpaid, wounds unhealed, battles unseen. The Red Sea has many faces, but the God who parted it remains the same. When hope falters, when the night closes in, when every road ends in darkness, lift your eyes. Step forward. Dare to trust. Dare to march. For faith is not waiting for the waters to part. It is stepping into the path when all logic says there is none. They marched, and the sea obeyed, for the God who parted the sea still parts seas today.